Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating connection. Have you ever thought about how the physical toys scattered all across a living room floor and the design of the interactive apps on our digital screens are fundamentally linked? Well, they are. We're going to explore how both tactile objects and digital interfaces serve as the underlying architecture of a child's early development. Because whether we're looking at a chunky wooden block or a glowing, interactive pixel, the core principles of how young minds learn to interact with the world around them remain remarkably consistent. So, what do a snap together plastic egg, a wooden puzzle, and a high tech iPad actually have in common? I mean, on the surface, they look wildly different, right? But they actually serve the exact same foundational purpose. They're basically intricately designed blueprints for a child's cognitive and motor growth. Every single snap, every turn of a piece, and every swipe on a screen is an essential building block. They're training young minds and tiny hands to decode, navigate, and ultimately master their environment.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the science of play, and how kids decode their physical environment.
So, the crucial point here is that before a child can even hope to successfully navigate a digital interface, tap a menu button, or play an educational game online, they absolutely must decode their physical 3D environment first. They have to understand how their own hands work, how objects move through space, and how gravity affects the things around them. This incredibly complex neurological mapping all begins with hands-on tactile play and the development of spatial awareness. Occupational therapists see a simple wooden puzzle not just as a fun toy, but as a complex, highly effective workout for the developing brain. Think about a puzzle piece shaped like a dog. A toddler can't just smash it onto the wooden board. They have to realize that the paws belong at the bottom and physically orient the piece correctly to make it fit. This constant trial and error, it's a vital, absolutely irreplaceable building block for visual perception and eye-hand coordination. Moving right along to Section 2. Unlocking language with toys. Now, shifting from physical coordination to communication, it gets really interesting to see how speech therapists actively harness the sheer kinetic energy of toddlers to naturally reinforce early vocabulary. They don't just sit a kid at a desk with flashcards, no way. Instead, they rely on repetitive, physical actions to teach foundational concepts and make abstract words feel totally concrete. For example, a speech therapist might use colorful plastic eggs, pulling them apart and snapping them together while enthusiastically labeling the actions open and close. Whether it's pressing a pop-up toy to make a character jump out or unlatching a tiny wooden door on a playhouse, language learning for toddlers is highly active. The physical action literally unlocks the verbal concept in the child's brain. Next up, Section 3, the power of puzzles as calibrated developmental tools. As you can probably see by now, toys aren't just mere distractions. They're meticulously calibrated tools that scale perfectly with a child's age. The physical and cognitive challenges adapt precisely as a child's brain and body mature. Take ages 1 to 3, for instance. Kids at this stage need chunky, jumbo knob puzzles because they're still exploring the world with a pretty clumsy whole-hand grasp. But then, as they hit ages 3 to 5, peg puzzles are introduced. Why? Because those tiny pegs force the child to use a much more precise pinch. And by age 5 and up, they graduate to complex jigsaw puzzles that require a highly refined pincer grasp, a ton of patience, and advanced spatial reasoning. It's quite literally a physical evolution, all mapped out right there in wooden cardboard. And the best occupational therapists take this to the next level. They don't just sit kids at a table, they use multisensory play. We're talking about digging through a literal bucket of dry beans to find a hidden puzzle piece, doing a bear crawl or an animal walk across the living room just to retrieve a shape, or balancing precariously across a beam before finally placing a piece on the board. This highlights a massive developmental secret for us. Cognitive tasks are deeply, deeply anchored by intense, full-body physical engagement. Let's move to Section 4 and see how this builds into designing digital playgrounds. Pivoting from the tactile 3D world over to the flat 2D digital screen, designing user interfaces for children requires taking all those physical limitations and cognitive milestones we just talked about and translating them flawlessly into pixels. Honestly, if you remember just one thing about kids' tech today, make it this absolutely critical UX role. Assume children will use your application without the help of an adult. Because preschoolers have uncoordinated fingers, remember they're still trying to master that tiny pincer pinch with wooden pegs, digital elements must be incredibly large, bold, and super forgiving. If buttons are too small or menus are too layered, you're going to get instant user frustration and the child will just completely abandon the app. But it's not just about the size of the buttons. It's also about how their brains actually perceive color and depth.
To put that into perspective, toddlers age 2 to 3 desperately need bold primary colors and very high contrast just to understand what they're looking at. Their visual processing is quite literally still coming online. However, as they age into older preschoolers, their visual tolerance completely changes. Thanks to modern animated environments, like the ones you see in shows such as Sid the Science Kid, a 4 or 5-year-old can comfortably process complex textures, subtle lighting, and really deep, immersive 3D environments.
Which brings us to Section 5, Literal Minds and Clear Icons.
You know, there is a massive psychological gap between how adults and how children interpret a screen. We adults navigate the digital world relying heavily on abstract metaphors, but young children, they are fiercely literal. They take everything exactly at face value. I mean, an adult UI is filled to the brim with abstract icons, like a floppy disk to represent save, which is wild because it's a piece of tech most kids have never even seen. We're totally fine with hidden menus, complex settings dropdowns, and tiny text links. A toddler UI, on the other hand, demands absolute literal graphics. If it's a drawing app, the icon needs to be a literal crayon, period. They require big, tappable buttons and short, punchy action words because young children simply have no mental model for our complicated adult abstractions. Now, what's really interesting here is that to prevent cognitive overload, UX designers must actively strip away all of that adult complexity and rely entirely on hyperliteral cues. Familiar media icons like the play triangle, those work beautifully because kids are used to watching videos. But imagine putting a print button on an app when you actually want them to start coloring digitally. A literal-minded child might press it and literally expect a physical piece of paper to pop right out of the iPad. You absolutely have to design exclusively for how their minds interpret the world. And finally, Section 6, the phygital transition, where digital meets physical. After kids fall in love with digital characters bouncing around on a vibrant 2D screen, they naturally start to crave a physical 3D connection with them. This is sort of the ultimate full circle moment. Take a look at Lucas and Friends merchandise, for example. It's the absolute perfect illustration of this transition in action. You take a beloved 2D digital character that a child interacts with on a flat screen, and you transform it back into a tactile, physical object for them to actually hold. It becomes a soft, shape-retaining plush pillow they can squeeze, a custom t-shirt they can proudly wear, or a leak-proof surfing water bottle for their real-world playground adventures. The digital experience becomes a physical anchor in their tangible world, completing the whole cycle of play. Well, we have covered a tremendous amount of ground today in this explainer, from the chunky knobs of wooden puzzles to pixelated app buttons and all the way back to soft plush pillows. And it all boils down to this final thought. As the lines between physical and digital play continuously blur, how are you shaping the architecture of the toys and apps in your child's life? The next time you look at the toys scattered across your living room floor or the colorful apps loaded up on your tablet screen, I challenge you to view them with a new analytical perspective. What invisible skills are they truly building right in front of you? Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep exploring.